comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Good morning, it's Friday morning with Esther and Phil, and we've got a cracking show lined up for you today. We'll be joined by Lord Sumption discussing the cost of lockdowns, because it seems to me so many people are still in denial from the impacts of lockdown, particularly the expense, 400 billion. There will be a fallout. And Ben Bradley MP on the lack of male role models in the classroom, and a hospitality expert to explain how the winter strikes will impact that industry.
We'll also be joined throughout the show by the former Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, and Conservative Councillor for Epping, Holly Whitbread. But first, let's get the latest news headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Philip. It's coming up to 4 minutes past 10, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Health Secretary is refusing to back down over nurses' pay demands ahead of their first national strike in over a century. Steve Barclay says he can't agree to what he describes as a massive 17.6% pay rise. Instead, he's open to discussing how working lives can be improved. The Royal College of Nursing accused the government of rejecting formal talks as an alternative to industrial action. As a result, staff in England, Wales and Northern Ireland will walk out for 2 days on the 15th and 20th of December. Shadow Women and Equality Secretary Annalise Dawes says the government has to negotiate a better deal.
Ultimately, it's going to be patients who are paying the price for this, as well as, of course, those nurses. So we need government to engage on this. Quite frankly, they're being grossly negligent at the moment. They need to sit down and sort this out.
A 6-year-old child has died after a bacteria outbreak at a school in Surrey. A second child is being treated in hospital. The UK Health Security Agency has confirmed the 2 children caught the invasive Strep A infection, which causes scarlet fever. Pupils and staff at Ashford Church of England Primary School have since been prescribed antibiotics. A man charged with the murders of a mother and her 2 children in Nottingham is due to appear in court today. Jamie Barrow is charged with the murders of Fatoumata Hidara and her daughters, aged 3 and 1. They died from smoke inhalation during a fire at their flat in Clifton on Sunday. Energy regulator Ofgem has proposed changes to protect customers and ensure suppliers are more resilient. They include the introduction of capital requirements so that companies have the funds to deal with market shocks. It's after soaring energy prices forced many smaller providers out of business. Ofgem also wants suppliers to help households by closely monitoring credit balances and identifying vulnerable customers. The Deputy Prime Minister has rejected claims he broke the ministerial code by bullying civil servants. In fresh allegations, Dominic Raab has been accused of using his personal email and phone to intimidate staff. He says he behaved professionally at all times. The Prime Minister has already appointed a senior employment lawyer to investigate 2 formal complaints. The Foreign Secretary has announced a package of hands-on support to help Ukraine through the winter, as much of the country remains in blackout. On his first official trip to the country, James Cleverly has met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, promising the UK will offer action, not just words. He's pledged to send 35 more emergency vehicles, as well as a further £3 million to help rebuild infrastructure. His trip comes after the most damaging Russian airstrikes on Ukraine's energy grid since the war began. The Prime Minister is considering a crackdown on foreign students who bring with them dependents and study low-quality degrees. Downing Street says Rishi Sunak is fully committed to bringing immigration levels down. It's after data from the Office for National Statistics revealed net migration to the UK climbed to a record 500,000 last year. The ONS claims student migration is behind the increase, with more pupils arriving since COVID restrictions were lifted. Royal Mail workers are striking for a second consecutive day. The Communication Workers Union has rejected the company's final pay offer, and more industrial action is planned in the coming weeks. CWU General Secretary Dave Ward says the union will continue the fight for jobs.
They are talking about destroying the Royal Mail as we know it today. They want to turn Royal Mail into just another parcel courier, and we're not going to accept that. This is an important part of the UK's infrastructure. We believe the public will support this dispute. We're in this situation because of gross mismanagement of the CEO and the board of Royal Mail, and we need a government inquiry now to look into the actions of the board.
Well, CWU rep in Northern Ireland, Denise Collins, says Royal Mail needs to recognise that postal workers are the foundation of the company.
Obviously, postal workers don't want to be on industrial action and standing out in the freezing cold and loss in pay and in the mouth of Christmas. So basically, you know, the company need to obviously sit down and come to an agreement that is going to be in favour of the members and in favour of the postal workers, who are the ones that are bringing the profits in for the company.
And Wales are chasing an historic World Cup victory in Qatar. Their match against Iran has just kicked off. And last time I checked, it's still goalless. Tonight, England will be seeking 3 points to secure the team's place in the knockout stages. Lions manager Gareth Southgate's urging his players to think big ahead of the game against the USA, which gets underway at 7 p.m. And best of luck to both teams. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Esther and Philip.
Thank you there, Rhiannon. And of course, we'll be keeping you bang up to date with that Wales game. Any scores, any goals, you'll find out about them.
I think Rhiannon will be watching it more closely than anybody.
She'll be running into the studio and letting us know what happens. And as you said, we've got some great studio guests today. We've got former Speaker John Bercow here, and we've also got Conservative Councillor Holly Whitbread too. But first, we're going to talk about the British public finances. And they're in the worst state since the Second World War. But why? Well, the elephant in the room is, of course, our decision to undertake costly COVID lockdowns, where we borrowed and printed hundreds of billions of pounds to prop up the economy. Lord Sumption, the former Supreme Court judge, now joins us. So I hope I said it clearly in the introduction there, the cost of lockdown. Many people are still in denial, but you're not one of those, Lord Sumption. So do you want to tell us what those impacts and the effect is?
Well, the National Audit Office last July gave us a fairly up-to-date estimate of the costs of the lockdown. They put the cost to government at £376 billion. Now, that's an enormous sum. It's by far the biggest contributor to our current financial crisis. Now, it's fair to say that some part of that £376 billion would have been incurred even if we hadn't locked people down. About a quarter of it, a bit less than a quarter, has been spent, for example, on improving health services. But the greater part would have been avoided if we hadn't locked people down. This is an example, it's the most dramatic example of what Rishi Sunak, in an interview in The Spectator a few weeks ago, pointed out was the complete failure of the government even to consider the collateral costs of lockdown before making the decision. There never was a cost-benefit analysis, in spite of voices like Sunak's own, which sought to point out that you really can't embark on a radical experiment with human life like this without actually working out the consequences.
Lord Sumption, I'd like to ask you about what I consider to be the failure of the law in some respects to protect our freedoms during those times of lockdown. You know, we have the Human Rights Act, which is supposed to protect our freedoms, supposed to protect the right to family life and all of these things, and it seemed to fall flat on its face during the COVID lockdown. Why was that? Why are our freedoms not better protected?
Well, there are really two different points that would have arisen in any litigation. Actually, they did arise when a businessman called Dolan actually brought a case before the courts. One is whether it was a sensible thing to do when you look at the balance of factors. I don't think there was ever the slightest prospect, even in an age of human rights, that the courts were going to take over the government's function in measuring that. The really critical issue was whether the government had the power to do these things at all without any effective parliamentary supervision. My view is that they did not. They should have used an Emergency Powers Act called the Civil Contingencies Act, which would have enabled Parliament to control the basis on which this was continuing and how long it was continuing and on what terms. They didn't do that, and the courts, I think, shamefully failed to intervene to make them. Other countries' courts did intervene. The Spanish courts famously said, you can't do something as serious as this without using emergency powers that give the Parliament the right to supervise at every stage. Our courts did not do the same. The French courts intervened repeatedly. They had a fast-track process to knock down any excessive measures taken by the government, which they used several times. The German courts stood up for the right of protest. Ours did not. The deafening silence of the human rights lobby in the face of this really is quite remarkable.
Do you think much of this will come out during the inquiry, these failures, whether it was the cost? And you wrote a wonderful article at the weekend just comparing the cost per head for every man, woman and child in Sweden. I think you had it about £450. And in the UK, the cost of lockdown for every man, woman and child was nearly £5,000. Do you think all these failures will come out in the government inquiry?
Well, I certainly hope that they'll be investigated. I mean, all figures are open to some kind of revision, but they certainly need to be looked at carefully. To my mind, the biggest governmental failure on this was the refusal of the government to consider most of the relevant factors. And it was a refusal. It wasn't just carelessness. As Rishi Sunak has made clear, the official line was not even to recognise that the collateral costs were there, let alone that they were serious.
Lord Sumption, while we've got you here, I hope you don't mind me asking about the proposals that we read in the paper recently in Scotland to get rid of a jury trial for sexual offences because they were concerned that the conviction rate was too low and that this would help increase the number of successful prosecutions. What's your view on that proposal to restrict the use of jury trials?
Well, the experience of other countries like New Zealand, who have introduced an option by defendants to opt for trial by judges rather than by juries, suggests that the more serious the offence, the more likely an offender is to do better in a judge-only trial. So I suspect they may well find that the result of this change is in fact to reduce the conviction rate because juries have a well-established dislike of sexual offenders, especially when it involves young or vulnerable people, which sometimes blinds them to the weakness of the evidence, particularly in very old cases. I think that we have to have juries because they inspire public confidence, and public confidence is absolutely fundamental in the criminal law. But I do think we've got to be aware of the price we pay for having juries, which is that you have people convicted by a tribunal that doesn't actually have to give its reasons, and that can lead to really quite serious injustice.
Lord Sumption, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. I have to say, methodical, insightful, rational, all those things. Thank you for joining us. And I have to also say, in the studio, we have got with us, who will be here throughout the programme, John Burko. I could say the same things about you. And also Holly as well, Holly Whitbread as well. So you've got a cracking guest, studio guests here with us. So what did you think about that lockdown? People are still in denial about whether it was a cost, whether it was human rights.
Well, Lord Sumption is both cerebral and distinguished. However, I would say that it is perfectly possible for people to be cerebral, distinguished and wrong. And in my opinion on the matter of lockdown, and you treated him extremely gently on this matter, Esther, Lord Sumption is fundamentally wrong. I think that he is in danger of elevating the importance of procedure over the fact of numbers. What do I mean by that? The truth of the matter is that whether you had an Emergency Powers Act or the mechanism that the government opted for instead, which was to push through regulations, in practice it wouldn't have made much difference because the weight of numbers in favour of those restrictive measures was such that they would pass anyway.
Now,
and my own view is that there were real costs involved in acting late. So he's arguing from the perspective that says this was economically damaging. I would argue that it was based on evidence and that, in fact, we should have locked down earlier and possibly for longer.
And that's a different argument. But standing by Lord Sumption and what he said, he did give the comparison between Sweden, which was voluntary, here, which had the lockdown, and it was the costs and the deaths, the whole shebang, and that's why I say it needs to come out in the investigation. But Phil, you were wanting to look at the hoo-ha today, this week in Parliament.
Yes, I want to get your opinion on this, John, because on Wednesday in the House of Commons, the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, who's very generally a mild-mannered kind of person.
Yes.
Like you.
Like me, really.
Well, I wasn't instinctively drawing that comparison, I must say, but he is. But he was very upset with an SNP MP called John Nicholson. And what happened basically was that John Nicholson had complained to the Speaker about Nadine Dorries when she was Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, and indicated that she'd misled the committee and wanted the Privileges Committee to look into it. And John Nicholson had written to the Speaker about it, and the Speaker had replied, and the Speaker was very upset that John Nicholson had A, leaked the exchange of letters, and B, only leaked a partial part of the Speaker's letter. Let's see what the Speaker had to say on Wednesday.
Can I just say, integrity is that, first of all, printing the letter, but only half the letter is not integrity. In fact, far from it. It misled the people of this country. It certainly put me in bad light with the people of this country, and I don't expect that to happen in an impartial Speaker. So if that was an apology, I don't think it was very good.
Oh. Well, what do you make of the Speaker being so upset about the leaking of correspondence between a member and the Speaker? Is that something that you ever encountered?
I don't recall encountering it, but instinctively my sympathies are with Mr. Speaker. I think it is a very important and long-established principle that if people wish to communicate with the Speaker, especially appertaining to matters of privilege, they do so in writing, and they do so on the basis, Philip, that that exchange is confidential. I think to breach that without authority, that is to say without seeking the Speaker's permission, is wrong, and it is even more heinous a sin to leak only a part of the exchanges, presumably in order to prosecute the argument that John Nicholson wanted to advance. So I remember Mr. Nicholson. He's a cheeky chappy, but in this particular instance, his cheek is excessive. And so although I learned of this only a few minutes ago when you apprised me of it, I didn't witness the exchange earlier in the week, my sympathies are very much with the Speaker. I'm not in favour, as you probably know, of preserving all conventions. For example, I think that the convention that stipulates that a member of the Commons cannot criticise a member of the other house can be an excessive constraint. Some of these are very sort of old-fashioned, time-honoured, gentlemanly or ladylike understandings, which are not necessarily fit for purpose. So I'm all in favour of reviewing conventions, and some of them need to be changed. But I think the convention about confidential dealings with the Speaker is an important one, and I think Lindsay Hoyle had every right to be extremely
And we had
aggrieved.
that this week with Baroness Moan, didn't we? People were wanting to question the PPE contracts, and that would have been classed not right from the one house to the other to criticise somebody else. But you think maybe could that be changed?
I think there is some merit in changing that. I think a lot of members are sufficiently versatile and dexterous on their feet that they're perfectly capable of finding a way of giving voice to their unhappiness without attacking her directly. But in some cases where the allegations are very, very, very personal to and focused on her, it might make it all but impossible to do so. So I think there's a good case for saying we don't have to apply that convention in a totally rigorous way. But I think there's a real difference between the Moan situation and the behaviour of John Nicholson towards the Speaker, which was, frankly, shameful. Shameful, I say.
Order, order.
Holly, what do you make of it all?
The Speaker incident. I think the Speaker was absolutely right. You know, when we're dealing with the public, we have to be honest and transparent. And I think he's in that place where he has to stand up to that transparency. So I think he did the right thing.
Right, now I think we've got breaking news there, Holly. Breaking news. I think we've got a quick update on the World Cup. And Iran have had a goal disallowed by VAR. So it's VAR. So it's still Wales 0, Iran 0, midway through first half. There you go, Phil. What about that? Lucky escape, because we were going to say Wales 0, Iran 1, but not anymore because of VAR.
We are indebted to you, Esther.
Thank you very much.
Indebted to VAR as well.
We're indebted to VAR.
Wales certainly are.
Coming up, are we running out of male teachers in the classroom? Well, one MP seems to think so. Conservative Ben Bradley will join us after the break.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you know, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narendra.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Welcome back, it's 10:25. We need more male teachers, not maths teachers. So said the Conservative MP Ben Bradley, who has raised concerns about the lack of male role models for young boys in the classroom.
There are no male teachers in almost a third of schools in some areas. We're joined now by Ben Bradley to explain why he got all upset about the lack of male teachers. What is the implications of that for you, Ben?
Morning, both. I think it's really important. So, as you said, 1 in 3 children, and it's the worst in the East Midlands, where I am from, have no male role model at school. But increasingly, millions of kids live without dad at home. 30,000 kids a month are subjected to abuse or really difficult situations at home. I'm concerned that although we'd like to prioritise, we want more maths teachers, we want more science teachers, we don't prioritise more male teachers, even though so many children have no sense of a healthy relationships or no positive male role model at home.
Is this an issue in all schools, Ben, or just primary schools? Because I always thought it was an issue more in primary schools than secondary schools.
Well, primary schools in early years in particular, so those figures drop down to 14% of teachers in primary schools in early years, which is woeful. But still, only 1 in 4 in secondary schools as well. So it's all the way through the system. And whether you are, 5, 6, 7 years old trying to figure out just how to be around people and how to interact, and as I say, those healthy relationships between men and women, how to speak to people, how to treat people, or whether you're, 15, 16 and trying to work out how to be a man from that point of view, if you've got nobody to learn that from, or your role models are not good ones, then that will no doubt lead to all sorts of societal issues. As I say, in my seat, 1 in 3 young kids leave school with no qualification whatsoever, boys and girls. But if you've got nobody to learn from, nobody to learn that work ethic from, and I think it's also equally important for girls as well as boys, because they need to learn about healthy relationships with men and how men and women should interact, as I say. So a hugely important issue, one that we don't tackle.
Ben, is this a deeper problem that you're alluding to there when you say a lack of male role models? Is this going into the home as well? Are we saying there's not enough men around these children?
Well, I think we are very quick to vilify men in our society increasingly. It's something we've talked about, International Men's Day debates and things in the Commons. But it doesn't often go down very well when we talk about part of the reason that men tend not to be in primary or early years settings is very often there are high-profile examples of men being falsely accused of all sorts of horrible things in caregiving settings. It's not an easy thing to get into. So there is, again, an issue, more and more people not living with dad at home. It's not against single parents, but clearly role models from both sexes are important for us to learn kind of how society works and how we interact with each other. One thing I've raised consistently for many years is that we're very, very keen with our equality laws to promote things like women into STEM, women into leadership roles, but we absolutely refuse as a society to recognise that there are areas where men are massively underrepresented as well, and we refuse to use those laws, which are intended to work both ways, to support men in positions like this.
People probably might say, though, Ben, look, what we want is good teachers. It doesn't really matter whether they're male or female. We just want the best teachers for the kids. And that actually, following on from Esther's point, that if there's a lack of role models in people's lives, then actually this isn't the right way to tackle it. The right way to tackle it is to get fathers to take more responsibility for their children and for them to be the role model, rather than trying to gerrymander the figures of how many teachers there are in schools.
Oh, sure, and I get that. I think there are huge societal issues behind all of this, and you're right, it would be brilliant if every father, every parent took full responsibility for their children. You and I know that that is not the case and that they don't do that. It's not for the state to pick up the pieces, I absolutely agree. But as much as I have railed against our equality legislation in the past, I do think if we're going to use it in one direction, to support young girls into STEM, as I say, or those kinds of things, absolutely fine and right. We have to use it in both directions to be able to say, actually, Philip and Esther, I've worked really hard on this issue of white working class boys who are at the bottom of all of our educational tables in terms of attainment. We don't use the law to support them, even though they are at the bottom of all the lists. We don't use the law to support men into teaching, even though we could and we should, according to the Equality Act. So I just think that imbalance means that we absolutely should tackle this and take it on.
Ben Bradley, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. And I was looking at the figures, John, and it's something like 3,240 schools with no male teachers. So is Ben onto something there, this notion of male role models?
He is onto something, but he distorts by exaggeration. I don't know whether he invented the slogan, more male teachers rather than maths teachers, but it is really rather juvenile. The truth of the matter is that the two things are not mutually exclusive. On the subject of maths teachers, it's very important that we have more of them and of better quality. There is a serious problem of the under-resourcing of the teaching of maths in schools. So I don't think that should just be dismissed or used as part of an argument for something else. On the subject of male teachers...
Having said that, you do know that to get a headline, people will seize upon something. So I'm quite sure he wasn't get rid of that. I'm sure somebody took it out of context because there was more women and they were promoting it. But the male role model is important, and they're lacking.
I do think that there are real shortages of male teachers in primary schools. I think inevitably one does tend to view this from one's own perspective. I didn't encounter it as a big issue in my own constituency, but thinking now as a parent, I have been very conscious at primary level of a serious shortage, much less so at secondary level. But I admit that I'm speaking from my own experience. If Ben says that the situation is very serious in secondary schools as well, he may be right.
Holly, what do you think? Are you a men's rights campaigner here on this?
Well, my brother's actually a teacher. He's a drama teacher at a secondary school, and he said pretty much all of his colleagues are women. And I think where you've got
dating odds,
yeah, exactly, yeah. But where you've got kind of he works in an area with relative deprivation, and actually where you have got breakdowns of families, it is really useful to have that male role model as well. And actually, sometimes younger people will go to a male role model rather than a female role model. So I agree with Ben in many ways. And actually, I think it's really important, that point he picked up on about white working class males as well.
What he shouldn't do, Esther, is use it as an excuse to try to undermine the excellent equality legislation that we have, and of which I feel sure that you and Philip are the keenest supporters.
And here we're going to give you, thank you, John, we're going to give you an update here on the score that's going on, the World Cup here. We now know that Iran, we've mentioned this before, have had a goal disallowed by VAR, so it is still everybody's 0-0. And don't forget, we want to hear your views as well. What are your thoughts? Don't forget, email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. But it's time now for the latest headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Esther. It's 10:33. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Health Secretary is refusing to back down over nurses' pay demands ahead of their first national strike in over a century. Steve Barclay says he can't agree to what he describes as a massive 17.6% pay rise. Instead, he's open to discussing how working lives can be improved. The Royal College of Nursing accused the government of rejecting formal talks as an alternative to industrial action. As a result, staff in England, Wales and Northern Ireland will walk out for 2 days on the 15th and 20th of December. A 6-year-old child has died after a bacterial outbreak at a school in Surrey. A second child is being treated in hospital. The UK Health Security Agency has confirmed the children caught the invasive Strep A infection, which causes scarlet fever. Pupils and staff at Ashford Church of England Primary School have since been prescribed antibiotics. The Foreign Secretary has announced a package of hands-on support to help Ukraine through the winter. The country is still experiencing power blackouts after Russian airstrikes hit key infrastructure. During his first official trip to Kyiv, James Cleverly pledged to send 35 more emergency vehicles, as well as a further £3 million to help rebuild the country. Royal Mail workers are striking for a second consecutive day. The Communication Workers Union has rejected the company's final pay offer, and more industrial action is planned in the coming weeks. The union's General Secretary Dave Ward says they'll continue to fight for their jobs. And Wales are chasing an historic World Cup victory in Qatar. The game against Iran, underway now, and I can tell you that it's still goalless. These are live pictures from Cardiff, where fans are waiting for the first goal to be scored, hoping the team will make it through to the final 16. And tonight it's England's turn against the USA. They're chasing 3 points to secure a place in the knockout stages too. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Here's Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2122 and €1.1631. The price of gold is £1,447.81 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,480 points.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store? You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. It's nearly 10:40. Some of your views coming in here. Alan said, as a man in his 50s, the last place I'd want to be in is in a classroom. Putting yourself in that situation is an open invitation to have your life destroyed by allegations of misconduct. Wow.
And there seems to be lots of support for Ben Bradley here. Cameron said, I agree, there needs to be more male teachers, especially in primary. And Bev said, we do need more male teachers. I agree. So keep those views coming in. We enjoy reading them.
Now, if it's not a winter of discontent already, it soon will be. The list of people going on strike is growing by the day. Meanwhile, what is the impact of all that strike action likely to be? Well, we're joined now by Kate Nichols, the CEO of UK Hospitality, to tell us about how businesses in her sector will be impacted by these strikes. Kate.
Yeah.
Hi there. So, strike action... as I said, it's growing daily. What is the impact going to be in your sector, the hospitality sector?
Well, the strike action that's planned for the middle of December comes at the busiest trading week for the hospitality sector. It is the last full week before Christmas. You have lots of people in city centres coming in for shopping, but also coming in for office parties, Christmas parties, socialising with family and friends. So it is one of the most impactful strike actions that we've seen so far. And the fact that it's a rolling series of strikes means it takes out effectively 7 days. It's coupled with tube action, it's coupled with bus action and overtime bans. And in total, we think it will cost the hospitality sector just around £1.5 billion of lost revenue on that week of strikes. That's almost as much as the impact was this time last year from Omicron.
I guess, Kate, people might say, well, hold on, the hospitality industry hasn't really got in a position to complain about this because the workers at Green King are going on strike, and so the hospitality sector's going on strike itself. So it's not really helping itself, is it?
Well, we have got small pockets of industrial action that are taking place across the economy. We understand why industrial action is taken by those workers. In the respect of the Green King ones, that's in distribution. This is a big impact. It has a knock-on effect for all of those sectors that are looking at strike action. I think there is a big impact beyond their own sector on what it does to workers in other parts of the economy who can't get to work, guests who can't come and visit, people who have missed appointments, missed opportunities to get together. There is a big economic impact on this.
And it is going to shake your industry to the core. I take it most of your profits for the year is done at Christmas time. And as you said, you've pretty much lost the last 2 Christmases.
Yes, absolutely. So for the hospitality sector, it's known as our golden quarter. Between Halloween and New Year's Eve, we will earn 30 to 40% of our profits. Vital for many of our community pubs and neighbourhood restaurants to get through the darker days of January, February, when it is traditionally much quieter. And of course, the sector very fragile because it did lose those 2 valuable trading Christmases to the COVID crisis over the last 2 years. So the sector will be hard hit. It will hit our workers who can't get into travel. They will have fewer hours, they'll earn less money, and obviously it impacts on our customers.
Now, I've been speaking to some owners of restaurants. They're now saying for the first time ever they might be closed all of January because you've got strike action, they won't have the money, you've got the fuel increase, you've got staff shortages, you've got food inflation. So they said for the first time they're going to close all the month of January because they don't make money that month anyway.
We are hearing that increasingly. Many of our rural businesses in tourist locations have already gone dark over December. You've got people who've closed between November and March when the tourist season restarts. So we are going back to some of the ways that we saw people operating probably 20 years ago in the hospitality sector. And undoubtedly the businesses are facing into that perfect storm of soaring energy bills, really rising inflationary costs, staff shortages, meaning they're having to turn away businesses or close for certain hours of the day. And it really is very difficult for many of these businesses to battle through.
Kate Nichols, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning.
So, Holly, what do you make of all these people going on strike? Do you have any sympathy for the
No problem at all, thank you.
Or should everyone get much tougher on them?
I think it's a really sad state of affairs, particularly as we're kind of moving into a recession. It's really disappointing to see. I feel for the hospitality industry who have been so badly affected, actually the wider economy, at a time where we need this investment in our economy. I think it's a real shame and actually in some ways quite vindictive when the timing has been, and a lot of public sympathy has been lost off the back of that, I think.
What should the government do? Should the government be getting involved in these disputes and trying to make sure they get settled, or should they be passing more legislation to make it harder for people to go on strike? What would you like to see happen?
Well, I think it's always a really difficult balancing act. I think obviously the government worked to try and facilitate conversations with the different unions, but ultimately those they've got to have the tough negotiations. But I think where the government need to act is be strong and make sure they stand against these strikes. But obviously what we don't want to see is a general strike, which looks quite a possibility during the winter months.
John, I wanted to ask you about the strikes, because obviously the people who have recently gone on strike are the university lecturers, and you're a professor of politics, I believe, on a part-time basis, so you can look at it from that perspective. You've also been the chancellor of 2 universities, Essex and Bedfordshire, so looking at it from both sides of the sort of employment fence, I thought you were going to ask him, will he be on the picket line? Well, he can tell us, but what do you think about
Well,
this?
I should emphasise, I certainly wouldn't cross a picket line. For the avoidance of doubt, I haven't sought and wouldn't be expecting for one moment any pay rise. I've got a particular arrangement with the university at which I lecture, and so it's certainly not about me. I'm not looking for any pay rise at all. That said, my overall feeling is that academic lecturers are not very well paid, and I've got considerable sympathy for them. I don't think that they will have anything like the scale of public sympathy that will be attracted by the nurses. And I suppose what I'd like really to say on this is none of us wants to see strikes. Of course, I accept that the impact of strikes can be damaging on particular sectors or the economy more widely, as Kate Nichols implied and Holly concurred a moment ago. But I do think you've got to ask, why are people striking? People are striking because the cost of living crisis created and reinforced in Downing Street is damaging their standard of living. Warm words, Philip, do nothing to put food on nurses' tables or heat in their homes. And I would be inclined to respect more the position of those who say, oh, not now, please not now, it's not convenient, it wouldn't be right, etc. If there was any evidence of any of those people ever supporting a strike. Now, if you or Esther or Holly could say, but there was a particular case in which we did support a strike, then I think that your position would have more credibility. But if the truth is you're always against strikes, I'm not very sympathetic to that.
John,
why should people have their living standards slapped as a result of trust?
I want to look slightly deeper here, because what you're seeing is like sort of rebellion, as it were, from the workforce throughout the country. Sort of 1.7 million public sectors are either going on strike or are going to ballot for strike. And I'm thinking there's lots wrong now in the business case of some of these organisations. So in universities, are there too many? Is the trying to, so they're employing too many people, too many students going there, going out, we'll be talking about immigration a bit later, going to have to go to foreign students to try and fund its way. Are they just too big and the business case doesn't work? And looking in the NHS, you've got people there, you're quite right, not enough money to pay the bills. And then you've got, whether it's a nurse bank or whether it's people who are getting locum rates, double, treble, significantly more than others. There's lots wrong and great unhappiness, Phil.
Well, there is lots wrong, Esther, but I think that the buck stops with the government. For example, on the subject of nurses, the government is incurring an astronomical bill in paying agency nurses.
Oh, that's
now, if the government would reach a proper, mature, negotiated settlement with nurses, it could probably save a lot of surplus expended cash in that way. But we come back to the point that, yes, they're asking for a big pay rise, and they're doing so because they are being crippled by the policies of the government. And that's the point that Steve Barclay has to address.
I just wanted to ask you, I mean, as far as I could see it, an extra day where we don't have any left-wing indoctrination in universities is a triumph. They go on strike every day of the year, as far as I'm concerned. I would have thought that was a good thing. But I was just wanted to ask you why it is that why would you, if you're happy with your arrangements and pay and conditions and all the rest of it, why would you not cross a picket line to go into work? I was just intrigued. If you were happy, why would you not cross a picket line?
Because selfish shouldn't rule OK, Philip. It's not about me, it's about we. And I'm very
What about the students, though, that are waiting for you to go and lecture to them?
But a lot of
what about them?
Right, but a lot of the students sympathise and empathise with the lecturers whom they greatly esteem and whom they think are, frankly, sorely, badly
I'm going to challenge that. I'm going to challenge that. Before COVID lockdown, university lecturers were on strike, and that sort of started in the January. We went into COVID, which was like lockdown, which was like an extended, never-ending strike. Yeah. We've come out of that, and they're finding their way to strike again. I'm meeting with students, and they're wondering what they were paying their £9,250 for a year, because they said it felt to us that they're professors and the lecturers were just constantly on strike. Holly, you're nodding.
Would you cross a picket line, Holly?
No.
No, you wouldn't.
No, I mean, in terms of the universities, even when I was at university, which was 10 years ago now, I had 5 hours of lectures in my last year of university. And I think there is that real question about value for money. But what we've got to remember with all of this, it's the public who are going to pay for it. And I mean, I've got huge sympathy for the NHS and nurses, but actually they saw an increase in their pay last year. This increase, you know, is going to cost huge amounts of money, and I think an above inflation increase, which is what they're asking for, is unreasonable at this time.
I just want the logic of that, Philip. I'm sorry, but the logic of that, I note what Holly's said, is that in her view, apparently, public sector workers should agree to have their pay cut. It's all very well to talk about there being a pay rise last year, but if that pay rise was below the level of inflation, in ordinary people's terms, what that means is that that staffer's pay was cut. And I suppose what I'm saying is, when the government is making an industrial mess of the running of the economy and the use of the public finances, they shouldn't expect people much less well paid than they are to pay.
Can I go back to lockdown again? Has this not had a big impact? Hence we had Jonathan Sumption at the beginning talking about that devastation to the finances, 400 billion, and we're all now having to pay for that in one way or another, and maybe getting out of the habit of going to work, and then the NHS NHS doing double the amount of work. There's lots of unhappiness.
Yeah, and I think just picking up on John's point, actually, you've got to remember there's a lot of people in the private sector who certainly aren't getting pay rises. They're actually paying the increased taxes as well. So that's something to really remember. But this isn't just the government's fault. I mean, you know, we've got rampant inflation because there's a war in Ukraine. So we can't just completely blame the government for the economy. It's just not right.
John, I wanted to... You sort of painted this picture of these benevolent trade unions doing their best for their members, and people should respect that and not cross picket lines. I've spoken to people on the railways who say, look, I don't even really particularly want to be a member of a union, but the pressure that you come under to be a member of a union, and that when you're in a union, the pressure to support a strike, and then if there was a strike, to actually go along with it, is terrible. I don't want to go on strike, really, but I feel sort of bullied into it by the behaviour of people in the unions. Do you not have sympathy for that? They're not all benign as you... I mean, I was brought up in South Yorkshire during the miners' strike, and some of the intimidation that went on to the miners then was terrible to behold. It's not quite the picture that you were trying to paint.
Well, I mean, there are probably benevolent trade unionists and others who are somewhat less benevolent, but I think that you are referring to a period of decades ago.
No, I'm talking about now.
Well, certainly when you're talking about the miners'
Well, yes, that was.
My point, I suppose, is that where there is a legislative framework which provides a clear mechanism as to how decisions on strike should be taken, I don't see any particular problem with that. Now, Holly makes the point that there are people in the private sector not getting pay rises. I think the stats overall show rises in the private sector of about 7% by comparison with about 2% in the public sector. So I think actually the private sector is probably doing a bit better. But where there are companies making very, very, very large profits and huge dividends being paid to shareholders, I understand the sense both of misery and of injustice that workers feel if they're told, sorry, not now, no can do. That can't be right. Why should they have to pay the price of the crippling of the economy by the government, which, Philip, you and Esther periodically support?
Periodically. But
not during the lockdowns we did.
Yeah, and I have to say that people would have gone for the opposition parties longer, stronger, more severe lockdowns. And I have to say, it's like the elephant in the room. People aren't looking at that, and that is what I think has fundamentally thrown everything up. Can we get some views in as well?
Yeah.
Do email us your views at gbnews@gbnews.uk. We want to hear from you. We're going to be also keeping you up to date with the World Cup. Phil, it's your favourite pastime.
Sport.
Yes, totally it is.
It is. Obviously, it's a huge day at the World Cup in Qatar. Obviously, England are playing later on this evening, and Wales are in action at the moment. England are playing the USA in the second group game this evening. But it's half-time, I think, in the game between Wales and Iran. So let's speak to Ellie Costello, who has the pleasure of being with some Wales fans in Cardiff watching the game. What's it like over there, Ellie?
Yes, good morning to you both. It's half-time here in Cardiff, 0-0. Wales versus Iran. It's been very tense here in Cardiff. You can see the red wave behind me looking a little bit more subdued than they were at 10 o'clock this morning. Lots of them wearing their Welsh football hats, the yellow, the red, the green. That has become synonymous with football in this country. We're hoping they can pick themselves up a little bit in the second half. Let's go talk to some fans now, see what they thought of the first half. So what do we think of the first half?
First half, I think it was always going to be tough. First 45 minutes against Iran, but all to play for second half now.
You're still feeling positive?
Yeah, we all wish we was in Qatar watching that, but second half now, couple of little tactical changes, nice early goal, happy days. Come on, Wales!
Come on, Wales. And what are we thinking about watching a World Cup, the first one that Wales has taken part in 64 years? Pretty incredible.
We're enjoying every minute of it. Great day.
And what's the atmosphere like amongst the fans now? Are we going to pick it up a bit? Are we going to stay positive?
Yeah, positivity second half. We just need our fresh legs, just in the midfield, and a nice early goal. We'll be there, happy days.
Right. I'm going to push you for a score prediction. What's going to happen next?
Wales going to be 1-0. All the way, no problems. We're going to win!
And who's going to score?
Gareth Bale. Come on, Gareth!
Gareth Bale. He's become a national hero. Well, he already was a national hero, wasn't he? But after his goal earlier on in the week, the Welsh are absolutely loving him. So, according to the Welsh here, they've got this in the bag and they're going to score in the second half.
I feel I should be be rocking with the music there.
Thanks. I wish Ellie well keeping a voice by the end of the day. I suspect her voice will have gone by the end of the game, to be perfectly honest. And there's no drinking at the stadiums in Qatar, but no such restrictions in Cardiff. It would seem. But anyway, they seem to be enjoying themselves. Anyway, coming up, the government got itself into trouble this week over housing targets. We'll find out why with the help of Conservative MP Theresa Villiers.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Still some showers around today, but for the vast majority it is a fine day, a break in between rain spells and with plenty of sunshine as well. Low pressure is still with us, we've still got this westerly breeze, but weather fronts have moved out of the way, and through the rest of Friday this bump in isobars, that means a ridge of high pressure, will come along from the west. Ahead of that, a few showers for northern and northwest Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest. Those showers fewer and further between by the end of the afternoon. A better chance of some sunshine in between the showers. And for much of central and eastern UK, it's dry through the day with blue skies. 13 Celsius in the south, 11 in the north. Still a fairly brisk breeze, but not as windy as it has been at times through the week. Into the evening, with clear spells and winds falling light for a time, temperatures will drop away, especially across central and eastern parts of the country. But further west, the cloud builds during the early hours, the wind picks up. So it's a mild start in the west, 12, 13 Celsius first thing for some exposed western coasts. In the east, meanwhile, 3 or 4 degrees, with a bright start here, despite that chill. Into the late morning, it looks like spells of rain will push through Northern Ireland into Scotland, parts of Wales and the far southwest. The rain becoming heavier and more persistent through the afternoon, accompanied by a strong wind, gales around exposed coasts. But it's a mild direction, 13 Celsius or 14 in the west. 11 or 12 in the east, where it does stay dry across East Anglia and the southeast until after dark, I think, with some brightness, although the cloud will thicken. And then through the evening, it's wet for many. The rain, heavy and persistent across southwestern areas, could cause some issues, but it does eventually, through Sunday, clear eastwards, and next week will eventually end up being drier than this week.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own news from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Welcome back. You're watching Esther and Philip on this Friday morning. We've got a great hour lined up for you. We speak to Theresa Villiers MP about how much say local communities should have over housing developments in their area.
And we'll be discussing record levels of immigration with academic and author Rodney Atkinson, and speaking to Eric Kaufman about wokeness in schools. And we're here with John Burko and Holly Whitbread throughout the show, so don't go anywhere. But first, it's the news with Rhiannon.
Yes, so thank you. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Health Secretary is refusing to back down over nurses' pay demands ahead of their first national strike in over a century. Steve Barclay says he can't agree to what he describes as a massive 17.6% pay rise. Instead, he's open to discussing how working lives can be improved. The Royal College of Nursing accused the government of rejecting formal talks as an alternative to industrial action. As a result, staff in England, Wales and Northern Ireland will walk out for 2 days on the 15th and 20th of December. Shadow Women and Equality Secretary Annalise Dodds says the government must negotiate a better deal.
Ultimately, it's going to be patients who are paying the price for this, as well as, of course, those nurses. So we need government to engage on this. Quite frankly, they're being grossly negligent at the moment. They need to sit down and sort this out.
A 6-year-old child has died after a bacteria outbreak at a school in Surrey. A second child is being treated in hospital. The UK Health Security Agencies confirmed the 2 children caught the invasive Strep A infection, which causes scarlet fever. Pupils and staff at Ashford Church of England Primary School have since been prescribed antibiotics. A man charged with the murders of a mother and her 2 children in Nottingham have been remanded in custody. Jamie Barrow has appeared at Nottingham Magistrates Court charged with murdering Fatoumata Hidara and her daughters, aged 3 and 1. They died from smoke inhalation during a fire at their flat in Clifton on Sunday. He'll appear at Nottingham Crown Court on Monday. A woman with Down syndrome has lost a legal battle in the Court of Appeal. Heidi Croter had challenged legislation which allows the abortion of babies with the condition up until birth. In England, Wales and Scotland, there's a 24-week limit for terminations, but that can be extended if there's a substantial risk the child could be born with physical or mental abnormalities. Energy regulator Ofgem has proposed changes to protect customers and ensure suppliers are more resilient. They include the introduction of capital requirements so that companies have the funds to deal with market shocks. It's after soaring energy prices forced many smaller providers out of business. Ofgem also wants suppliers to help households by closely monitoring credit balances and identifying vulnerable customers. The Foreign Secretary has announced a package of hands-on support to help Ukraine through the winter. The country is still experiencing power blackouts after Russian airstrikes hit key infrastructure. During his first official trip to Kyiv, James Cleverly pledged to send 35 more emergency vehicles, as well as a further £3 million to help rebuild the country. The Prime Minister is considering a crackdown on foreign students who bring dependents to the country and study low-quality degrees. Downing Street says Rishi Sunak is fully committed to bringing immigration levels down. It's after data from the Office for National Statistics reveals net migration to the UK climbed to a record 500,000 people in the year to June. Royal Mail workers are striking for a second consecutive day. The Communication Workers Union has rejected the company's final pay offer and more industrial action is planned in the coming weeks. CWU General Secretary Dave Ward says the union will continue to fight for jobs.
They are talking about destroying the Royal Mail as we know it today. They want to turn Royal Mail into just another parcel courier, and we're not going to accept that. This is an important part of the UK's infrastructure. We believe the public will support this dispute. We're in this situation because of gross mismanagement of the CEO and the board of Royal Mail, and we need a government inquiry now to look into the actions of the board.
And the union's rep in Northern Ireland, Denise Collins, says Royal Mail needs to recognise that postal workers are the foundation of the company.
Obviously, postal workers don't want to be on industrial action and standing out in the freezing cold and losing pay and in the mouth of Christmas. So basically, you know, the company need to obviously sit down and come to an agreement that is going to be in favour of the members and in favour of the postal workers, who are the ones that are bringing the profits in for the company.
And Wales are chasing an historic World Cup victory in Qatar. At half-time, their game against Iran remains goalless. These, if you're watching us on television, are live pictures from Cardiff, where fans are anxiously waiting for that first goal, hoping the team will make it through to the final 16. Tonight, it's England's turn against the USA, also chasing 3 points to secure place in the knockout stages. And best of luck to both teams. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though it's back to Esther and Philip.
Thanks, Rhiannon. John Burko still with us. Will you be watching the football tonight?
I most certainly will. Initially, I was going to be talking to an audience tonight. And the truth of the matter is that by mutual agreement, but at my suggestion, the fixture has been shifted to January, because I want to watch the football, and I rather reckon that some of the people that might have attended my talk would rather watch the football.
Could have been an empty room.
It could have been an empty room.
For those people who don't know, you're a big Arsenal supporter, so...
I'm a huge, fanatical, obsessive, swivel-eyed Arsenal fan, and therefore I am enormously proud of Bukayo Saka for the 2 goals that he scored the other day, and it reinforces my view that he's a great player, not just a great player for Arsenal, but a great player for England. Philip, thank you for your generosity of spirit in allowing me to make that point.
Right.
Ollie, will you be watching the football?
I will be. I'm actually at another event, but I'll be a glass of wine in hand watching it, definitely.
Well, I've got some cracking views coming as well. Madge said, we've been talking about sort of the strikes and the unions. Madge says the health secretary should be in discussion with the nursing unions. These people worked through dangerous times during the pandemic. Seemingly, we have no problem finding over £6 million per day to put illegal migrants up in luxury hotels, but choose to ignore our own loyal people in the NHS.
Greg says, come on, if any of you think it's just about pay and not to do with working conditions and contracts too, then I'm sure you'll find some seafront properties to buy in Leicester, Nottingham and Birmingham. So Greg's not persuaded that this is about pay.
It's all very well and good, these people striking for more money, but what about the millions that are not in unions? Their earning differential gets wider, hardly fair. Keep those views coming in. Now, Tory MP Theresa Villiers is trying to ensure that local communities have more say over housing developments in their local area.
But is this just an attempt by NIMBYs to pull up the housing ladder from others wanting to get on it? Well, we're delighted to be joined by Theresa Villiers now. Theresa, thank you for joining us. So, come on, then, is this what this is about? NIMBYs, they've got their own home, and now they're on the housing ladder, and they want to pull the ladder up to stop anyone else from getting a home. Is that what this is all about?
No, it's not. What it's about is restoring local decision-making over planning decisions. That's been at the heart of the planning system for many years, that local democratically elected representatives should have the major say in what gets built. But since 2018, these mandatory top-down targets for house building have made it harder and harder for local councils to make their decisions to turn down development which is viewed as inappropriate or damaging to the environment, because again and again they're told, well, you have to say yes to this development, even if it's totally wrong for this area, because if you don't say yes to this development, you don't meet your targets. And I think this is damaging the environment and damaging the quality of life of my constituents and many other members of the public around the country.
Of life of people who can't get a house. I mean, do you not accept that if you got your way, fewer houses would be built and there'd be fewer places for people to live?
Well, the amendment on targets is part of a wider package which looks at how we improve the supply of new homes, the right homes in the right places. For example, there is a long-standing problem where developers apply for permission to build and then don't build and then just come back and ask for more planning permission elsewhere. And actually, there's also a really successful precedent over the last few years with the introduction of neighbourhood plans, which relate to a particular local area and empower local communities. And actually, they demonstrate that if you give local communities responsibility and agency over house building and what gets built where, they actually step up. They do make sure that they identify sites. So it's not a binary choice about whether you build or whether you don't build. It's about building in a sustainable way and making sure you build the right homes in the right places.
Teresa, I hear all the time it's more about the infrastructure. So governments are dictating the numbers, but the money hasn't flowed in advance for the roads, the schools, the GP surgeries, all of that infrastructure. And that's fundamentally the problem. And therefore, that's causing the upset on the ground.
That is a great concern to me and to many of my sort of 50 or so colleagues who've signed these amendments. So often these targets are meaning that local councils have to accept or they're forced by the planning inspectorate to accept housing which just isn't supported by infrastructure of the sort that you're speaking about. And particularly roads and parking is an issue, but also public service provision as well. And again, part of the package of proposals that I brought forward in Parliament is to get developers paying up front to fund some of that infrastructure to mitigate the impact of increased development on local areas. This is another way in which we're trying to put forward a positive agenda to ensure that we build the homes we need, but in a way which doesn't override local communities and decision making.
Teresa Villiers, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, we've got a packed studio here. We've still got Holly, we've still got John Burko, and also joining us now is Freddie Poser. That's the director at Priced Out UK. So hopefully you heard what Teresa was saying there about localism, about having a say in an area, about infrastructure, what have you. But you have the opposite point of view. You feel, as your name would suggest, you're priced out. A young person can't get on the house ladder. How do we square the circle?
Absolutely. I wouldn't necessarily call it the opposite point of view because we're not interested in imposing things on communities. But a huge number of people, and when the campaign was founded, it was mostly young people, but you're finding it older and older groups of people are still priced out of the housing market. And that doesn't just mean owning anymore. That also means that rents in London are skyrocketing. So people can barely afford to live in the city. And as much as we'd love it that every house had, 100% community approval, the fact is that research is suggesting that an amendment like Teresa Villiers removing house building targets could cause a £17 billion hit to the economy and cut house building by 20 to 40%. And the fact is...
They're not meeting any of the targets at the moment by at least 100,000 as well.
So we're going to get even fewer houses. and we know where the 300,000 house building target comes from. We've known since 2004 that that's been the target, and we haven't hit it. So, I'd love to work with the Rebel MPs on this because I think that actually, clearly, if she's true to what she's saying, she wants to see more house building, but this is going to cut house building and make the crisis worse, not better.
So, I mean, Freddie, I always think of housing as the ultimate supply and demand market. It's all about supply and demand. And I was looking at your website last night, and there was an awful lot there about supply, building 300,000 homes a year and everything, but nothing about demand. And so I was wondering whether you were one of the people who would want to see the levels of immigration into the country cut so that we could actually reduce the demand for houses in the UK rather than just constantly looking at more and more supply.
I think that even if you did cut the levels of immigration, in the medium term, that's basically not going to change things because in London is incredibly vibrant and attractive global city, and so are many of the cities across the country. So actually, we're finding that the pressures in London are already there. People are already living in bedsits and sharing rooms. So I won't be drawn on the immigration question.
But it is a vital question, because if it was meant to be 500,000 homes built this year, and then maybe increasing, you do have to look at both sides of the argument. And added into that, I think we frequently get to maybe 150,000 homes being built for lots of other reasons. You haven't got the materials, you haven't got the people, you haven't got the architects, you haven't got the planning provision. There's so many things going into that mix. So you can't duck out of that. You do have to look at the demand.
I think it's there for, the government does need to have a policy on immigration, and I think the key is that the planning system is restricting supply already far beyond. Even if we had significantly lower levels of immigration, you'd have too little house building. So I think the government has to come to its own decision on immigration, but whatever that level is, be it significantly lower, we're still going to need to hit this 300,000 home target.
The thing that's really controversial in my constituency is about the green belt, protecting the green belt. It's not about house building per se. It's about. Do you think the green belt should be sacrosanct from house building, or do you think there should be more building everywhere?
The green belt absolutely can't be sacrosanct, because as any area of public policy, it changes. Since 1979, the area of the UK that's protected by green belt has doubled in size. So criticism that we're taking away a huge amount of green belt simply aren't correct. If you include areas of natural beauty and other areas that are significantly restricted on development, 30 times more land is under protection from development than is actually urban land and developed in this country. But also, not all greenbelt land is greenfield.
As we're building more houses, and we're building sort of new garden suburbs and new towns, obviously the belt has shrunk in some areas because we're building out and encroaching either way, and so there's less of a buffer between some of the cities and some of the rural areas. But I can see John nodding with you there. You've got support there to your left.
Well, I've not met Freddie before, but I have found what he said this morning extremely persuasive. He quite obviously knows his stuff, and I think he's motivated by a desire to ensure that the demand for housing is properly met. And I don't think that we should obscure the issue by referring to the immigration debate. The immigration debate is important, and by all means, let's have a discussion about that. But the reality is that for all sorts of societal reasons to do with the mores of modern society, the fact that people leave home earlier, people live longer, family breakdown is what it is, there is a huge demand for additional housing, and there is a great demand for more affordable housing. And I suppose really what I would say to people like Theresa Villiers and others who may be supporting her amendment on the matter of housing targets, Philip, Esther, is quite simply this. David Cameron, more than a decade ago, probably nearer to 15 years ago, lampooning and coruscatingly criticising people who were against more housing, said that he could think of a word to describe the NIMBYs, and the word was banana. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. 10, 15 years later, we've got the same problem. The truth of the matter is, there are quite a lot of South East Tory MPs who don't want more housing in their areas. And we're not going to achieve levelling up and social mobility unless we have much more housing. We need more houses built, not fewer. And Theresa Villiers' amendment should either be withdrawn or demolished.
Now, Holly, I know that your area...
One of these days, I'll tell you what I really think.
Your area that you represent has a lot of green belt. So what would your residents make of the points that Freddie and John have been advocating?
So I think most people would agree that we do need more homes, but it's about building them in the right places. Actually, focus on those brownfield first sites, but actually building where there's a need for growth and a desire for growth. So in my area, there is a lot of opposition to Greenbelt. So we're 93% on the edge of London. So we've got a lot of pressure, and I think our housing target's around 12,000. So there's a huge amount of pressure. But actually, it's about having a sensible and sustainable plan, but also focusing on brownfield sites, which actually in my own ward, we've looked at a kind of town centre regeneration. And one of the things I'm quite passionate about is getting more people onto the high street. So the empty offices above shops, using those as homes, and kind of regenerating sites previously used for other purposes.
I mean, Freddie, isn't that the point? That it's about putting them in the right places. And actually, to be perfectly honest, if you build a load of green house on the green belt in Buckingham or in Essex or whatever, they're not going to be affordable for young people to buy. They're going to be hugely out of the reach of everybody. They need to be built in town centres and city centres.
Well, there are 2 points there. First, on brownfield first, the Labour government, when they came in 1997, thought this brilliant idea, well, let's only build on brownfield. And surprise, surprise, it didn't work. Brownfield development is incredibly important, and we need to do a lot more of it. But there will always be a place for urban extension and greenfield land building for numerous reasons. Not least because housing is the only thing people build and need to build. Sorry, what was this? The second question was...
But they're unaffordable.
The unaffordability.
For young people building in the green belt in Buckingham.
We need to build the right homes, but if you build something that's unaffordable, someone generally moves out of a slightly more affordable property to get it, so you get these moving chains. And in fact, there is a good basis of academic evidence that suggests that even if you build unaffordable homes, that has a marginal impact on lowering through the... But you're absolutely right. We need to have affordable targets.
I'm going to be slightly more nuanced here because I do think you've got to work with people on the ground because they are feeling upset. And a lot of it, because I've got very pragmatic people who live in Cheshire, but they don't have the infrastructure and they don't have the schools, the GP surgeries and all of this. And they say, we would build, but until we get that first, not the promise, the never ever promise, build these buildings, oh, it will come, and it doesn't come afterwards. So I think there is definitely something to balance up there, and I do think we have to have a long-term plan of population size. If you know, in the last 20 years, the population has more or less increased by 10 million. Not only is it the number you want a year, it is addition on top of that.
But Esther, the imperative for more housing is a national mission which local areas need to support. And I suppose what I'd say is you never get the full supply of infrastructure. What I'm bothered about is when you say you've got to work with people locally, one should be working not just with the noisy and vociferous opponents of more housing, but with the people who haven't got a home. And those are the people, I think, in this debate who tend to be without a voice.
What I will say,
that's
they're
the problem,
not
they're without
always
a voice.
different because invariably it is their children. So they do have that thought in their mind, how do we help our kids? Do you know what? We're chatting on and on and on here. We do want to hear from you as well. Should there be national targets? Should there be local say in it? Some of the things that Theresa Villiers was bringing through as well was looking at more money to support brownfield sites as well.
Agree with that.
Freddie, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We appreciate it. Just to let you know, they've played an hour in the World Cup match between Wales and Iran, and it's still goalless. But we will be crossing live to Qatar before the end of the show.
I heard a dear there from John Bercow. But coming up next, the Home Office has confirmed net migration hit more than 500,000 people last year. Who has arrived here? Why? And where are they coming from and will they stay? Well, we were joined by political reporter Olivia Utley and academic Rodney Atkinson after the break.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narendra.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory. twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. Your views are coming in.
Dawn said Labour would have been worse during COVID and debt would be higher. Peter says, check out the old film I'm All Right, Jack, where Peter Sellers plays a shop steward, Fred Kite. Note the similarities between his character and Mick Lynch of the RMT. I think people should watch Carry On at Your Convenience, which is one of my favourite films of all time. And actually, it sums up perfectly the attitude of trade unions, I think. Everyone should go and watch Carry On at Your Convenience.
And Alan said, why are we allowing overseas students to bring up to 4 people into the country when they come to study here? 4 question marks after that. This is another bonkers left-wing government policy. The sooner this administration is out, he says, the better. Not that Labour would be any better, and that seems to be people's upset. Who do they turn to?
Anyway, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has said that the government has failed to control the UK's borders after the Office of National Statistics announced record levels of immigration into the UK.
Net migration from June 2021 to June 2022 was over 500,000. Now, joining us now is our political reporter, Olivia Utley. So these figures, surprising for some people, shocking.
Yes, I mean, the government is making the point, very much stressing the point, that a lot of the people who've come over here in the last couple of years are as a result of the invasion of Ukraine, the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, Hong Kongers are coming over here, and those are all people who most Brits feel should be granted asylum in the UK. But actually, they don't make up that much of the overall figure. And what we have seen is this explosion in foreign students coming over and bringing over their dependents. We're looking at around 600,000 foreign students plus dependents, which is around half the overall figure of people coming to the UK being granted visas to work and study. What the Prime Minister is saying that he is going to do, or at least mulling over, is cracking down on this by limiting the number of dependents that a student can bring, and also possibly only allowing entry to foreign students if they are going to an elite university. Because the worry is, of course, that foreign students are using this sort of loophole in the immigration laws of students who are allowed in to come here and then studying degrees which don't actually get them a job in the labour market. The problem, of course, is that basically you've got 1.3 million immigrants coming over here. The argument is that they can help fill jobs that British people don't want to do, and yet there are 1.2 million vacancies in the UK.
Olivia, thanks for that. Let's get more of this and speak to the academic and author Rodney Atkinson. Rodney, thank you for joining us. These figures, as we've just said, are rather shocking to most people, given that the government pledged it was going to cut down on immigration into the country. What do you think is sort of behind these shocking figures?
Well, I'm afraid it's another example of the legacy of the Johnson years, our debt and sclerotic economy on the one hand, and here we have various migration agreements never put to the people, of course, in elections, which frustrate our ability to stop uncontrolled immigration and repatriating those who have failed asylum applications. The trouble is, you see, I warned way back in 1990 in a Bow Group paper on conservatism in danger, I called it, about the Conservative Party becoming less conservative and more corporatist. That is the classic combination of right-wing big business on the one hand and the left-wing socialist state on the other. And both of those pillars are more than open to mass migrations. And of course, the decades really now of the British economy and government interventions have meant that we have a sort of old banger economy. And the government is perpetually putting its foot on the accelerator, printing more money, borrowing more money from future generations, artificially boosting activity, but doing absolutely nothing, and indeed making productivity and wealth creation worse. But every time they press on the accelerator, there's an artificial boost to activity. And big business says they need more labour, so it should have more immigration.
Rodney, so what do you think the solutions could be?
Well, as I say, we have plenty of people in this country who are either not employed or underemployed or falsely employed. That is, for instance, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in large businesses and in state employment who are really not required there. Productivity of the state sector is pretty horrendous year after year. So they really should be redeployed into the wealth-creating sector, into the market sector, where they can, instead of consuming our wealth, produce it. This would considerably reduce the demand for imported labour.
Rodney, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We've got to get to the news, but we very much appreciate you joining us on this subject with your interesting insight into why we've got ourselves into this kind of a mess.
It was interesting, that sort of right and left, the big business saying we need more people to do this work, other people saying, oh, be more open borders, and it's how we deal with the two and get that sorted.
I'll tell you what interests me, though, is that lots of the people who were most vociferously in favour of Boris Johnson staying on as Prime Minister or coming back as Prime Minister are the people who are most annoyed about these figures. And, of course, these figures went from June 21 to June 22 when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. And, you know, I think it's quite well, I think he was quite liberal on immigration. I think he always was quite liberal on immigration, contrary to
We'll come back
opinion.
to our studio guests on this and your views a little bit later.
Yeah, but coming up, is critical race theory and wokeism an endemic in British schooling? We'll be looking into a new report revealing what's actually being taught in the classroom. But that's after the news with Rhiannon.
Oh, you keep throwing to me at just the wrong time for this Wales game. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom, and it's just gone 11:33. The Health Secretary is refusing to back down over nurses' pay demands ahead of their first national strike over a century. Steve Barclay says he can't agree to what he describes as a massive 17.6% pay rise. Instead, he's open to discussing how working lives can be improved. The Royal College of Nursing accused the government of rejecting formal talks as an alternative to industrial action. As a result, staff in England, Wales and Northern Ireland will walk out for 2 days on the 15th and the 20th of December. A 6-year-old child has died after a bacteria outbreak at a school in Surrey. A second child is being treated in hospital. The UK Health Security Agency has confirmed the children caught the invasive Strep A infection, which causes scarlet fever. Pupils and staff at Ashford Church of England Primary School have since been prescribed antibiotics. A woman with Down syndrome has lost a legal battle in the Court of Appeal. Heidi Croter had challenged legislation which allows the abortion of babies with the condition up until birth. In England, Wales and Scotland, there's a 24-week limit for terminations, but that can be extended if there's a substantial risk the child could be born with physical or mental abnormalities. The Foreign Secretary has announced a package of hands-on support to help Ukraine through the winter. The country is still experiencing power blackouts after Russian airstrikes hit key infrastructure. During his first official trip to Kyiv, James Cleverly pledged to send 35 more emergency vehicles, as well as a further £3 million to help rebuild the country. Royal Mail workers are striking for a second consecutive day. The Communication Workers Union has rejected the company's final pay offer, and more industrial action is planned in the coming weeks. The union's General Secretary Dave Ward says they'll continue to fight for jobs. And Wales are chasing an historic World Cup victory in Qatar. Their game against Iran now well into the second half, still goalless. An early Iran goal ruled out for offside. These are live pictures, if you're watching on television, from Cardiff. Anxious fans there hoping Wales can boost their hopes of making it through to the last 16. Tonight, it's the turn of England against the USA. They're chasing 3 points to secure their place in the knockout stages. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2106 and €1.1634. The price of gold is £1,448.77 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,489 points.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. We're on tenterhooks here for this Wales game. Every time you don't see us, we're on our little iPads checking out what's going on. Phil, you've got a couple of views there.
Yes, people have been contacting us about the strikes. Liz said, I'm inclined to agree with the strikes, particularly in our low-paid private sector jobs. We've become a society of expecting everything 24 hours a day, leading to low-paid jobs with poor contracts and long hours. We're told that the public expect or want these services. Well, perhaps it's time we got used to life without them and gave the workers better hours on conditions. And Jean says, I thought the lockdowns were complete insanity. I was still working as a nurse in a nursing home, and I voiced my concerns about the cost of all this, only to be told by certain staff that it was to save people's lives. We now see the repercussions of this stupidity.
Thank you for those. Now, a new report published by the think tank Policy Exchange suggests that critical race theory and wokeism is endemic in British schooling. According to the report, 59% of students encounter terms like white privilege and unconscious bias in the classroom. We're joined now by the author, Eric Kaufman, to tell us more. So, we're all alarmed, but should we be?
I think you definitely should be. I mean, I think the narrative had been that these were just a few isolated incidents like the American school in London, but actually what this survey shows, it's a representative sample of 18 to 20-year-olds, and I asked them sort of what they were taught in school. 59%, as you mentioned, had encountered 3 of these critical race theory terms, white privilege, unconscious bias, and systemic racism. If we include patriarchy and many genders, sort of almost 3/4 are encountering at least one of these terms. So this is a majority of school children that are encountering these terms, which are based on unscientific, radical theories that I don't think have a place in school unless they're discussed alongside classical liberal theories that defend the Enlightenment. And in fact, we're not seeing that. In almost 70% of cases, people were saying these were taught as fact, not as one respectable alternative compared to another.
Supposedly, I was going to say they don't like groupthink, but by classing everybody as a big group who are this, that, and the other, rather than the individual who actually can do the right thing, it seems slightly contradictory to me, their theories.
Well, it's all based on this idea of historically marginalized groups, which is fair enough, but the idea that any differences in outcome, on educational attainment, whatever it is down to these invisible structures of systemic racism or sexism that we can't measure. It's a very unscientific argument, and it's being pushed as a mainstream theory in schools, and there is already an impartiality obligation in schools. And schools are violating that. And actually, the government is not, I mean, they're trying to some degree, but they're not really, through Ofsted, enforcing this impartiality properly.
So what I was going to ask you about that, because most parents will be thinking, well, you know, the schools have got to teach things in a balanced way and all the rest of it. So if that's not happening, what can the government do? What should the government do? What can Ofsted do? Can teachers be sacked for indoctrinating their pupils?
You know, the government has to issue much clearer guidelines, guidance, Ofsted as well, that defines something like, you cannot say that systemic racism is not a political concept. The way the teachers, or some of them, are defining racism is in a very broad way that includes this very unscientific concept of systemic racism. So their view is, oh no, we're just teaching consensus values, anti-racism. But actually, smuggled into that very bloated definition of racism are these radical theories. So the government needs to tighten up all those definitions in the guidance, and they also have to make sure the schools are willing to make their curriculum open to and transparent to inspection. And that's currently not occurring. There is no inspection regime that enforces this political impartiality. All of that has to be changed.
The thing that strikes me about schools is that in history, they always seem to teach kids to be ashamed of our history. Rather than the things that we should be proud of in our history. And it seems to be completely different to in America, where they're very proud of their constitution and their history. And you go into a school, I've been to a school in America, and you ask them about the constitution, all the kids know their constitution off by heart. If you were to go into a British school and ask them about Magna Carta or the Bill of Rights, they'd probably look at you as if you'd just dropped off a different
John's nodding his head vigorously there, as is Holly.
Is that not sort of part of the problem here? This sort of people not being taught to be proud of our history and our institutions?
Well, I think your picture of America might be sort of 20 or 30 years out of date. All of these numbers that I've presented for Britain are about 25% higher in the US.
Really?
But you know, as in the US, you know, if you look at, for example, if you poll school, you know, these people that I polled, their view, you know, should Winston Churchill's statue be removed from Parliament Square? They're evenly divided. I mean, the 18 to 25s, whereas if you take 50 plus, it's like 85% no, 5% yes. So, and on question after question, whether it has to do with cancel culture, you know, should J.K. Rowling be dropped by her publishers? They're evenly divided. The over 50s are sort of 85 to 5. You know, so we have a very new set of values emerging with this generation. And it's being reinforced by the schools. The schools are not the main driver. It's mainly social media, but the schools are reinforcing and certainly not challenging these beliefs.
And so, John, you're a university lecturer and professor. Do you indoctrinate your students with all this left-wing rubbish when you're when you're
I don't
teaching them?
indoctrinate anyone with anything. I offer a view and I'm questioned about it and there's an interaction. I suppose what I would say off the top of my head, without having read that report, of which I got notice only an hour or so ago, is this. White privilege, unconscious bias, and systemic racism are facts of life. They're not just imaginary notions. I don't know how pervasive they are, but they do exist. And my feeling about it is this. I represented a very conservative constituency for 22 years, and from memory, I did not receive a single letter or email from any constituent complaining about schools in the constituency preaching these doctrines. So my sense is that it is a greatly exaggerated furore. On the point about pride in history, I suppose the answer is a rather nuanced and balanced one, Philip. I'm proud of parts of our history and not other parts. One point where perhaps we can agree is that I think a lot of people are not as well informed about our history as they should be. And as far as Parliament is concerned, one of the reasons why I campaigned successfully for the establishment of a state-of-the-art, cutting-edge, interactive digital education centre was that I thought that young people should be encouraged to come to Parliament and to learn about the journey from the signing of the Magna Carta to the rights and responsibilities
And I think
of
that's
citizens
what
enjoy
we've got
today.
to be mindful of, because I believe in the power of the individual. And this group condemnation, I think, is utterly nonsense and divisive.
I just want to ask Holly, because I think, Holly, I might be controversial here and say that I think you're the youngest person on this particular panel. Did you ever suffer any of this kind of indoctrination when you were at school? And
Not really, but what I hear now is a lot of young Conservative activists actually feel sometimes scared about being conservative and political at school. When I was doing my politics A-level, I had a fantastic politics teacher. He was a communist, but actually we had such good discussions, and I think there needs to be that freedom, but teachers should be balanced. And on the point of pride in history and knowledge of history, I think that is vital and something we should be fighting for.
Philip, can I just say this? Everybody remembers the history man and the sense that there was widespread abuse, discrimination, bias in universities. In 1982, when I was a right-wing Hayekian conservative, I went for interview at Essex University, and I was interviewed by a Marxist academic with a picture of Marx on the wall, and I was dreading the outcome. And I got the best offer to go to Essex University. Any offer I got anywhere.
Yeah,
So
and it
all I'm saying
worked.
is
He
that
indoctrinated
place
you.
was
So absolutely, you were indoctrinated and changed.
It just took a long time for it to seep
Yeah.
through that.
He was fair.
Final word to you there, Eric.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all well and good to sort of look at the warts of history and the positives too, but I think the balance, we have to look at where the balance is. So 60% of these students basically say Britain's a racist country, 60-40. I'm not sure that's a very productive way to look at history. You have to contextualize it by looking at, what were the abuses of non-European civilizations, the Aztecs, the Mughals, who else has had slavery, what about the excesses of the left, Mao, etc. I mean, if it's that contextualized, I'm all fine with talking about Britain's sins, but to do it without context, I think that's what's happening in the schools.
Eric Huffman, here. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Now it's a huge day in the World Cup in Qatar with both England and Wales back in action. Wales are still drawing 0-0 against Iran with just a few minutes left to play. Apparently the Wales goalkeeper has just been sent off. Wayne Hennessy has just been sent off. I don't know whether that's going to lead to any penalties or free kicks or whatever, but he's just been sent off.
We need an update.
No penalty, just a red card is what I'm being told.
And just 5 minutes left to
play.
play.
Yeah, it's all happening. Anyway, Paul Hawkins is our man in Doha. It's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it. Paul, are the England fans getting excited already for tonight's game?
Yeah, they're getting excited. The heat and the excitement building ahead of that kickoff against the USA at 10 o'clock. But right now we're into the very dying stages of the Wales-Iran game. And as you say, Wayne Hennessy sent off in that game against Iran. Look, Wales have been dreadful in the second half, and it's been all Iran. Just to bring you up to date with what's been happening in case you've not been watching, in the first half there was a toe poke. Wales had a really decent chance with a toe poke straight at the Iranian goalkeeper. Iran had a goal disallowed for offside, and then in the second half the Iranians moved through the gears. They hit each post twice in the space of 10 seconds. Wayne Hennessy, the Welsh goalkeeper, also palming wide one shot from the Iranian striker, and then he's just been sent off. It has been all Iran in the second half. Wales are clinging on. They're now down to 10 men. If they get away with a point in this one, that will mean they have 2 points from their first 2 games, which means that their final game against England is a must-win. And as we say, England play the USA at 10 o'clock tonight.
Well, we're all looking forward to the game tonight, and Paul, thank you very much indeed for joining us and giving us that latest update. And enjoy the sunshine and enjoy the game tonight. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. That wasn't a very flattering description of Wales's performance, though, was it?
No.
I think you said they were dreadful and they'd had a toe poke, I think was...
Yeah, no, I entirely agree with you, Philip, and I think it's fortunate from his point of view that he wasn't close to Rhiannon at the time.
Yes,
because if he'd been anywhere near Rhiannon,
I think that's true.
I think he might have been assaulted.
I think that's probably true. Anyway, we're going to end the show, as we always do, with the latest showbiz news. And as ever, here is Sarah Robertson.
It's been a busy day, hasn't it? People coming in and out the studio, and now we've got Sarah. Fantastic.
I know. It's like pass the parcel or pass the journalist. Very, very, very busy week this week with showbiz. So starting off, some shock news. David Walliams sensationally quitting as BGT judge. This comes a few weeks after the allegations. He had to give an apology after it emerged that he had made vile slurs and comments against former contestants during filming for the show. Contracts are up at the moment for renewal, I've been told. Amanda's currently in negotiations for hers, as is Alicia Dixon. And David Walliams has chosen now, after 10 years on the panel, that he's gonna step back.
So was he pushed, or did he jump, or is it an element of both? Or
Phil, don't you put me on the spot because I don't want to get illegal.
I live with this.
Sarah, you always know what's going on.
I do know what's going on, but I can't actually say properly on here, so I'm going to have to...
uncharacteristically coy.
It is, but David Walliams is a very powerful man, so I'm
coincidental timing, whatever it is.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, very coincidental timing. That's a very nice way of putting it, Esther. We'll use that. Add that to my vocabulary. But on to the next thing, which is a bit easier to talk about. We've got the I'm a Celebrity final due on Sunday, and it looks like Matt's going to be coming in third place. Oh. So, yeah, they're expecting him to make it into the final three. At the moment, Jill Scott, Lioness, Euro 2020 hero, 2022 hero, shall I say. She's looking to be the favourite with 1 to 2 in first place, followed by Hollyoaks star Owen Warner, who seems to have really, captured the nation. He's meant to be coming in second, and Matt's clinging on.
Well, he's captured the nation, hasn't he? Matt Hancock. I mean, everyone was saying he was
to the Tyndall fellow.
This is really interesting with Mike Tyndall.
Who would have known Burko was a fan there?
I'm certainly not claiming to be a fan. I'm just aware of the existence of the chappie.
John, I'm so glad you asked about Mike, because this has been a little bit controversial. Now, Mike, going in, everyone thought, oh, such an affable guy, such a nice guy. He's going to end up for sure, the favourite. But he seems to have quite divided people. There's a lot of people have actually gone off Mike. I think because he's been speaking a lot about, obviously, the royals and, said about how he flashed Princess Anne once, or, yesterday he was talking about coming into Buckingham Palace in jeans and a T-shirt. But the thing is, I feel a bit sorry for Mike.
And it was no big thing dating a royal.
Yeah, but it's like... if he doesn't talk about that, then everyone says he's boring. What's he got to say? And then if he does talk about it, all the real big, royalists sort of come down.
Damned if he does, damned if he doesn't.
That's exactly it, John.
Checkmate.
Totally checkmate. Thank you. So can we have John every week with
John,
me? Are you
open to an offer to follow Matt Hancock into the jungle?
Yes,
Would
can
you?
we see
In the next series, could you be tempted?
No, I'd be useless at it. Look,
John,
on the subject of Matt Hancock, I think that the biggest weakness in his case, I know this is a parliamentary point and some people may think it's pompous, but I think it's definitely valid, is that he shouldn't be doing it when the House is sitting. I think is the principal objection. To be fair to him, I'm no great fan of his. I haven't watched it, but members of my family have, and they think that he has done very well. They say he's resilient, he's stoical, he's good-humoured, he's a team player, and he has, frankly, done the tasks.
Now, Esther actually wrote in her Express column today about this, and because she predicted that she thought he might, at the start, that he might become a national treasure.
Before anybody was. I said, do you remember? And everybody poo-pooed me.
Yeah.
Because I thought there were lots of things. One, he would steal the show in a way because everybody would be giving him the tasks to do, which they did. But people underestimate how sort of stoical, resilient MPs are. They put their head down. They're used to people sniping about them. They live their life in full transparency. So I thought it was good training, as it were, to go in there.
And Johnny got a lot of money £400,000. Think of that cash.
Are you attempting bribery?
It seems to work.
Monstrous behaviour on your part. Utterly monstrous. No, I think I've been fair-minded.
I think you'd be cracking
No,
on
I
the
think
show.
you would. Would you go on, Holly?
No.
Would you watch John if he was on?
I would. I have
We'd
been
all
watching
watch
it, though.
John. Wouldn't everybody watch John if he was on?
Definitely.
I'm going to stop the negotiations for John. I'll just do a 20% rate. Get you in there, 400,000.
I need to take mine as well.
She was quick to get that point in, wasn't she?
Oh yes, always. I think it'd be very fun. I do miss you in the House of Commons when you would say, was it Peter Bone?
Mr. Peter Bone.
I loved it.
Brilliant. Sarah, thank you very much indeed.
you.
Holly, thank you for joining us. John, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It's been terrific fun as always. Thank you very much indeed.
It's a pleasure and a
said
privilege.
Peter Bone, but my favourite was order. Order.
Order!
You had to have that. That's it from us today. We'll be back tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Coming up next is GB News, and then it's the Andrews Pierce Show. So don't go anywhere. Cracking lineup for the rest of the day.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Still some showers around today, but for the vast majority, it is a fine day. A break in between rain spells and with plenty of sunshine as well. Low pressure is still with us. We've still got this westerly breeze, but weather fronts have moved out of the way, and through the rest of Friday, this bump in isobars, that means a ridge of high pressure, will come along from the west. Ahead of that, a few showers for northern and northwest Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest. Those showers fewer and further between by the end of the afternoon. A better chance of some sunshine in between the showers. And for much of central and eastern UK, it's dry through the day with blue skies. 13 Celsius in the south, 11 in the north. Still a fairly brisk breeze, but not as windy as it has been at times through the week. Into the evening, with clear spells and winds falling light for a time, temperatures will drop away, especially across central and eastern parts of the country. But further west, the cloud builds during the early hours, the wind picks up. So it's a mild start in the west, 12, 13 Celsius first thing for some exposed western coasts. In the east, meanwhile, 3 or 4 degrees, with a bright start here, despite that chill. Into the late morning, it looks like spells of rain will push through Northern Ireland into Scotland, parts of Wales and the far southwest. The rain becoming heavier and more persistent through the afternoon, accompanied by a strong wind, gales around exposed coasts. But it's a mild direction, 13 Celsius or 14 in the west. 11 or 12 in the east, where it does stay dry across East Anglia and the southeast until after dark, I think, with some brightness, although the cloud will thicken. And then through the evening, it's wet for many. The rain, heavy and persistent across southwestern areas, could cause some issues, but it does eventually, through Sunday, clear eastwards, and next week will eventually end up being drier than this week.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and on